We welcome our next speaker, Bridget Fogarty Gramme. She's going to talk about artificial intelligence and the law.
Okay, thank you. That was so great. Thank you, Purvi. Okay, so I want everyone to imagine for a minute that you're not here on this beautiful day, but actually you are home and you're really sick and you have a really bad cough and you have a fever and you called the doctor and the doctor's office says, oh, we can't see you for another week. And so you make your appointment, but then you turn to the next best thing, which is Google, and you find out that there's some technology out there. There's actually an app that will diagnose respiratory illnesses. So you say, okay, why not? So you download the app and you cough into it, and then the technology is such that it can detect the sound of your cough and that cough, and then they can diagnose you. So you use this app, it tells you, oh my gosh, you have pneumonia, and it emails you a prescription right there, and you go, you get your medication. And 2 hours later, you're really sick because you're having a violent reaction to this drug, and so you're in the ER. And the good news is you recover. But you start to think about what happened here, what was going on. And so you call the medical board and you say, you need to know about this. This is really terrible. I want to file a complaint. There's this app and it really hurt me. It really damaged me. And the medical board says, oh, well, we actually don't license machines. We only license people, so we can't help you. And then you call your lawyer and your lawyer says, well, I've researched this, and there's actually no laws about this. There's no regulation of these machines, and so actually there's nothing I can do. So this is the starting point that I want you to think about when we're talking today. Let's see, is that working? How do we do this? There we go. Okay, so I really like this quote from Stephen Hawking. It says, our future is a race between the growing power of technology and the wisdom with which we use it. And that's what I want to talk about today. I am not an engineer. In fact, my fellow lawyer and I were getting a tutorial yesterday in blockchain from one of our friends here who gave us a flow chart, and I still don't understand it. But I'm here to talk about the policy. What happens when the reasons that when people who are licensed or when machines are replacing functions of licensed individuals? How do we handle that? How is the law set up for that? And that's what I want to talk about today. So some examples of this that I know about right now that are going on. There is the FDA in the United States just approved some technology that will actually diagnose diabetic retinopathy without the use of a doctor at all. And so this kind of technology, and I'm not exactly sure how it works, don't ask me, but the point is this technology is replacing functions that licensed individuals do. And this is happening in many different fields. In the law field, I've even heard of, I haven't seen it talked about seriously, but that you could use AI to upload the law and then have judges, robotic judges that could just theoretically apply the law without any bias because they're not looking at the individual. Now we know that there's many problems with that, but the point is this technology is being talked about, and we don't really have a regulatory framework within which to use it. Let's see. So my point today is AI is great, and there are a lot of potential positive things that can come out of it, but especially when it's replacing functions of licensed individuals, it's something that needs to be regulated. And I really believe there's an urgent need right now, as a lawyer who focuses on professional regulation, there's an urgent need right now for us to create a regulatory framework that is consumer-driven and is consumer-focused so that we can protect the people that are the users, the ultimate users of AI. So very briefly, what does it mean to have a regulatory framework? A regulatory framework, the way it works in the United States, and there are similar versions around the world, but basically the way it works in the United States is there are state-by-state professions are licensed by the individual states. And the states create a board made up of members who are appointed by the governor and the legislature, and they're made up of a combination of professionals. So for example, the medical board is made up of 8 doctors, and then there are 7 public members or non-doctors. And each state has a different composition of the way that they do that. But basically, these boards' job is to carry out the laws that the legislature make, and then also create regulations that set standards of care for the various professions. There's also in this ecosystem of the regulation something called trade associations, and those trade associations are membership organizations made up of members of that profession. They're not part of the government. They are, their job is to advocate for policies that are good for those professionals, and so they are part of the mix. So to give you a quick example, a couple years ago, I was at an optometry board meeting, and the optometrist association representative came up and said, you know, the sky is falling. There is this technology where you can take a picture of your eye, you can email it to a company, and this company can give you glasses. They can just send you glasses based on this picture of your eye, and this is terrible, and you, optometry board, should make it illegal right now. And the reason that she said this was not because the technology was faulty and would hurt somebody's eye. The reason that she said it was because people need to go to optometrists to get the health of their eye checked. And if you're not going to an optometrist because you're not going to get glasses, you're not getting your eye checked, and then therefore that's bad for the public. But as an antitrust lawyer, I hear that and I think, are you concerned about the public, or are you concerned about your market share as an optometrist? Are you worried about the fact that somebody can take a picture and get rid of one of the major functions that you perform? Are you worried about your market share? So that's just an example of the way that the framework, the way it works in licensing. Okay, but we regulate, in theory, the reason that we license doctors and lawyers and people in professions is because we need to protect the public. So people like doctors and lawyers, we can impose irreparable harm on people. And so that's the reason that the government sets standards. And that's something that is important for the function of regulation, and that's why we have licensing. So the way that we do, so public protection is the most important part, and we do this in two ways. We do it by ensuring minimum competence, that these people are minimally competent to practice. So that usually means we set some kind of educational standards, and also, in the case of the United States anyway, we also have some type of licensing exam that people have to pass before they can hold themselves out and receive a license to practice. And it's also a system of accountability. So if you think back to the example that I gave you at the very beginning, it creates recourse for people who have been injured by these professionals. The boards go and they investigate what happened, they investigate complaints, and they will take away, discipline people and take away their license if they're presenting a harm to the public. So how far do we take this when we're thinking about AI? As I said, there are many pros, right? It can really present access to people. So in the case of this optometrist example, I mean, maybe somebody in rural California who would never go to the optometrist ever would at least now be able to have access to glasses if this company is a viable company. I mean, maybe it's not the most ideal situation, but it could present the situation where people have more access, and it can drive down costs, which are positive things. It can also be more accurate. You can diagnose things more accurately. You don't, if there's a robot doing surgery, it's more precise. They're not under the influence of drugs or too tired that day. So there can be a lot of pros. But there can also be a lot of cons. And especially when we're talking about algorithms and we're talking about equality, the people that program these algorithms themselves can be biased. And what can happen, or what happens if there's a bug? What happens when something goes wrong? And so I really believe that what we need is a regulatory framework to deal with the situation that I explained at the very beginning. And for now, I just have some principles. There's more questions and answers at this point, but there are 4 principles, I call it a power play, that I think really need to be in the center of our discussions about what this regulatory framework should look like. So the first one, as I talked about, is public protection. This AI, at least in the sense that it could be replacing licensed functions, it could impose serious irreparable harm upon people. And because of that, especially in this context, we need to have some kind of regulation to control it. The second is liability, and setting up some kind of system for accountability for people so that there is a way. If that could mean insuring the machines, requiring that machines themselves have insurance. It could mean allowing, licensing the corporations that own or manufacture. There are different ways, but some level of accountability must happen. The third is access and equality. So I already talked about access as an issue. That's something that needs to be considered. But also equality and making sure that we don't end up with like two systems. So for example, if we had, in the legal field, if we had people that can afford lawyers can go and have like a person, and then people that can't afford lawyers can use this chatbot over here that may or may not be programmed appropriately or that may not be regulated. So we need to make sure that this technology is used for good and something that can be equally applied to all. And the final principle I put is you. And what that means is it's we the people and not those that have profit stake interest in the outcome of these policies. So when we talk about a challenge, I think the biggest challenge that we face right now in doing this, first of all, is the fact that the law is designed to be very slow. And technology is, as you know, extremely fast. And so how do we come up with a common set of principles so that people are at least minimally protected in a way that is flexible enough for the technology to continue evolving? And the second challenge that is really important to overcome is the fact that the people who have a profit stake interest in this are so extremely powerful. And that's coming on two ends of the spectrum. So on the one end, as I talked about with the optometrists, you have the professions themselves. Somebody talked yesterday, I really liked it, about the big, boring companies or institutions being, recoiling at the fact of some kind of change happening. And that's exactly what is happening with these professions. They don't want to see this technology necessarily coming in because they view it as a threat to their market share. So they, who have a lot of power, both before the regulatory boards and also before the legislature, are advocating for regulation and stifling this type of innovation from happening. On the opposite extreme of this spectrum, you have technology companies who do not want any regulation at all because they say that it's stifling their innovation. So how do we find this middle ground, this ultimate point? And that's where I really believe that the opportunity comes in. And that opportunity is proactively coming up with a regulatory policy that is consumer-focused. That's what is key, and that means that people that do not have a profit stake interest in the outcome of this policy should be at the center. We were talking, again, one of the speakers yesterday was talking about designing with humans in mind, right? Being human-centered when you're designing this technology. Well, the same thing should be happening with policy. And the fact that it needs to happen proactively is unique because the way that it works right now is usually a tragedy has to happen. A tragedy strikes, people die, and then the legislature will act and enact policies. Like if you think about seatbelts, even just as a very simple example, right? I mean, why do you think there's a law that you have to have seatbelts? It's because a lot of people died before that, where they decided to make that rule. So, and typically, especially in my area, we don't, as a center, as a nonprofit, we don't have the resources to have this like heavy influence like the trade associations do or the tech companies do. But our leverage comes from news stories when the media is exposing some kind of injustice or some kind of tragedy, and at that point, we're able to get the policy through. So the opportunity, I think, is to come up with this framework now on a proactive way to come up with some system of liability and ensuring minimum competence, at least in the area where AI is replacing licensed functions. So we can get this in hand before people start dying. So as far as things that you can do, I just want to challenge you to keep learning, and knowledge is power, but especially to think about this from the perspective of your own industries, wherever you're coming from, and think about the policies as well and the way that the things that you are developing or that you are investing in can be implemented at the policy level. And think about regulation, I think, a lot in the tech world especially, and I've been seeing things like that. I just read that President Trump had a press release last week that said, the United States is investing in AI, and we're going to get rid of all these regulations that are preventing it from happening, and we're going to move forward, and we're going to catch up with China. And, I've seen similar statements coming out of other countries as well. And the fact of the matter is regulation at some level is important for public protection, so we can't forget about that. And the second part is your own spheres of influence and how can you make an impact. So that's the same thing. And then finally, for investing, I really think it's important that when you're thinking about impact investing, think about nonprofits too. Think about nonprofits like ours do not have a profit stake interest in the outcome of these policies. And we're up there working with the legislature trying to get policies through on behalf of the people, and we really need support to do that. So to bring it back to the beginning with Stephen Hawking's race against technology and wisdom, I passionately believe that coming up with this proactive regulatory approach can at least take the wisdom ahead of the technology. So thank you very much.